episode 3 of Parenting Through the Developmental Stages. In episode 1, we talked about what's really going on behind our child's behavior. And in episode 2, we talked about all of the overwhelming amount of parenting strategies that are out here. So today, what we're going to dive into is a simple framework that all of that fits into. And this framework is going to be the posture for how you show up as a parent. Because so often I hear parents say, like, I know what the strategy says and it makes sense when everything's going well and I'm calm. But then my child acts out, talks back, disobeys, doesn't do what I ask, and all of a sudden I've lost it. Well, there's two things there. The first thing is that, like, when our mind is overwhelmed and flooded with all of that information, it's not accessible to be able to draw upon, because what in that moment happens is we get triggered. There's an emotional fight, flight, freeze, fawn response that is triggered. And so that element of how to respond comes down to our own nervous system regulation, which is what we're going to talk about in the next episode. But then once we are regulated, how we respond in each moment can take on so many different forms. And to memorize all of these different forms can be really overwhelming. As I was sitting down during my time working on my master's degree in child psychology and development, and I was reading through all of the research on relational psychology, I thought, you know what? I love this. I love taking complex information and boiling it down into something that is simple and livable. But this is a lot of information for parents to hold in their brain. Like, it has to be simpler than this. And so I was actually on vacation on a ski trip. And as I was out snowshoeing, I was praying about it. And the Lord said, it's about empathetic parenting. And I was like, I know it is, but like, how do we explain that? And the Lord said, just model it the way I do it. And I was like, say what? And then he started to show me this pattern throughout scripture about how he shows up. And it starts in the garden in Genesis 1, where first of all, there's chaos, and he brings order out of chaos by simply naming out. Then when Adam is feeling lonely, Adam doesn't have the words for I'm lonely, I need help. God knew what he needed and provided it. Even when Adam and Eve sinned, God approached them with this heart posture of love and invited them back in and asked questions. He said, what's going on? He noticed their sin. He named what was behind it. And then he said, okay, there's going to be consequences, but I'm going to clothe you and I'm going to send you out. And here's how you're going to survive. You're going to work the ground. And so in that posture, God noticed, named, nurtured. Well, what's really remarkable is how this shows up in so many stories in scripture. When we look at Genesis 16 with Hagar, when we look at Isaiah 44, when the people are fearful of the Assyrian army coming, when we look at Jonah, when we look at Joseph, I mean, just countless stories. And so that's why the resource that goes along with this video is a biblical guide to allow you an opportunity to sit with some of this scripture and to see this pattern of how God shows up, noticing what we're walking through, helping us name it and bring order from it, and then nurture that growth. But then it wasn't until years later that I went back into the research and I realized that meta-analysis that I spoke about in issue 3 of Heart Shapers, Legacy Makers, where researchers tried to find like what parenting approaches helped develop healthy children. And they found this pattern of warmth versus rejection, structure versus chaos, and autonomy support versus coercion. And I thought, oh my goodness, noticing it is attachment. Notice when we notice what's going on in our child's life, we see what they're struggling with. We invite them into conversation. We help them feel safe enough to have that conversation with us, even when it's a hard emotion, letting them know, like, I'm strong enough to handle your anger and your sadness and your hurt. Let's talk about it. That forms the foundation of attachment. Then when we invite them to label those emotions, to talk about them, to share them with us, that's affect labeling. That's logical and linguistic processing, which also comes from the science. And that's bringing structure out of chaos. Instead of the child wallowing in like, I don't know what to do with this, I don't know how to respond, That's creating that structure by naming it. Or let's use even another example. A child who's not doing their chores. We've asked them 5 times to go pick up their clothes, and it's like, okay, this is becoming chaotic because I am just having to ask everything day and nothing's getting done. We go back to like God spoke order into the chaos and said what needed to form each day. And when people started to flounder in the Bible, God gave them instructions step by step for what to do. Look at what he did with Moses and going to Pharaoh each day. He gave him exactly what he needed to know when. Look at Joshua. Look at Joseph when he is trying to protect the people from famine. Like God gives us step-by-step instructions in the same way that the scientific literature tells us, like create visual cues, charts, schedules, routines so that children know what to expect so that it can offload kind of that overwhelming process of thinking in their brain. And then the last stage, that nurture it stage, goes back to the autonomy support versus the coercion. That's the third thing that the research showed is parents who support a child's autonomy and development rather than coercing them into behavior. So we don't want to say things like, because I said so, or don't do that, or stop behaving that way, or go to your room until you can calm down. Those are all coercing them to behave in a way that we want them to behave without understanding the heart behind what they're struggling with and saying like, okay, we need to learn emotional regulation. Or we need to learn how to set a timer to remember to do our chores. Or, okay, homework feels really challenging. Let's set a goal and get the homework done piece by piece. That provides that scaffolding that Lev Vygotsky's research showed is so integral to child development. So there we have, like, the research shows this posture of warmth, structure, and autonomy support. God shows the same, where he always invites us back, always asks questions about how we're doing, helps us name what we're missing and the gap, and then helps walk through and nurture the growth with us. And then the science has now proven this, that notice it and that warmth comes from secure attachment. It comes from like Dan Siegel's work about regulating the amygdala and making sure that we notice what's going on in our child because there's some sort of behavior underneath it. And then moving into the naming it, like name it to tame it. That's where the name it, the structure comes from. We also know that when we provide coaching feedback, as John Gottman's work has shown, or when we teach our child how to respond to another person and we build that social skill, it builds self-determination theory based off of Ryan and Desi's work and Albert Bandura. And then when we get into the nurture it stage of helping them learn, okay, what do I need here? That's autonomy support. And that comes through things like growth mindset, through goal setting, through building resilience. And so that is why I'm just so blown away by how God modeled this approach of notice it, name it, nurture it in Scripture. And those are my words. Obviously, those words are not in Scripture, but it was this pattern, and those are the words that I put to it. And then science is saying, like, we have to notice what our children are working through. We have to help them name it, and we have to help nurture that growth. And so this is why when I work with parents, I don't help them memorize new strategies. What I help them do is recognize how to adopt this posture. How do I just come at everything in this relationship with my child, just seeking to notice what they're struggling with, name what they need, and then nurture that growth? Because everything fits inside of that. And that is the foundation of what we're going to talk about in the rest of the episodes in this series, because we're going to dive into, okay, what does this look like in infancy? An infant is just learning to trust people. How do I notice, name, and nurture what they need when they're wailing at the top of their lungs at 3 a.m.? What about the toddler who refuses to put their shoes on or refuses to let you put their shoes on? They want to put their shoes on. How do we notice, name, and nurture that growth? It applies to the 5-year-old who has all these creative ideas, but it is making a mess around the house. Or your 10-year-old who is overwhelmed by homework but doesn't want your help. Or your teenager who cares more about what their friends think than what you think anymore? Like, how do you still maintain that presence with them? And so I love using this framework, notice it, name it, nurture it, because it is just a simple posture of, okay, how would God notice, name, and nurture this? How do I notice, name, and nurture this? And parents get to step into it with the confidence of knowing that it is backed by research and science, because it is a framework that envelops and adopts all of that. So this is just the start of that. I am so excited. In our next episode, what we're going to do is we are going to talk about the foundational element of nervous system regulation and how our calm helps produce calm in our child, or our chaos produces chaos in our child. Because when we approach this from an appropriate vagal tone, and we'll talk about what that means, when we approach this from an appropriate vagal tone of calm and connection, it is the foundation on which notice it, name it, nurture it can sit, so that we can respond to every childhood behavior in this way. So I'm so grateful that you're here. Please be sure to share this with a friend so that they don't miss the next episode drop, and I'll see you next time.